Thank you very much. I would be talking about how some of the practices I've seen across funding agencies, good practices they had in reducing research base. The underlying data that I use for this presentation is two publications that were published in Lancet and got a reasonable amount of interest in social media and the media. And is that this one? Oh, yeah, got it on. So I've been, the fundamental framework I use, but the reduced research-based framework, that some of you might have been yesterday here in the session, I've heard about it, and it has a lot of elements that is overlapping with research integrity. So the data, I have used this framework to evaluate the work of 12 funding agencies. It's one funding agency more than the Lancet papers because I'm continuing doing the evaluation. And these are in Europe, in North America and Australia. One of the things we had to develop methodology, how to deal with it, because there was no previous studies done evaluating research funders and how to do that. And in all of the cases, we do ask the funders what were afterwards for the feedback, whether we got it right or wrong. And I think everybody except of the Danish funders responded to it. So when I have done the study, we have rated funders based whether they were meeting the standards or not meeting the standards as green, red, and yellow. So green is when you meet, red you don't meet, yellow is in between. And I got some weird questions both from people emailing me or social media is how can we be green? And one of them was as a deputy minister of a country who just wanted to start her funding agencies. And from all of the different elements, we have discussed, and the 4 elements we felt maybe should be prioritized was having stakeholder engagement, like in medical research patient in part setting, having processes to have systematic reviews to inform future research before making decisions, and being more open about the data with registering studies and publishing protocols and publishing full data. However, as I know that some of the funders here and who are interested in this are also established funders, the issue is also, do you fund research that evaluates your research practices and what you have done now before you try to change the practices? That's the reason the first thing I mentioned is, do the funders fund methodological research, so research on research? And interestingly, one of the people on social media called it, that's a way to get our house in order, which I thought is a very good way to describe it. And if you look at it, there were 3 funders, the American NIHR and the ZoneMW, the Dutch funder, who have a dedicated research on research program. And there are funders that do have internal staff working on them, or they have the opportunity from other programs that you can ask for methods research. But there are only 3 who has a dedicated program. And these dedicated, I think I've gone to, yeah, no, I can't. So there are 3 of them who has this dedicated program. And so they have, the English and the Americans are more concentrating on evaluation design of medical research. The Americans have a very big emphasis of patient outcome research. And the Dutch funder has gone further and talked about research and research integrity and social impact. And because there is very limited funding for research, whatever these funders do, whatever they fund, defines what methods research we would have available, unfortunately. When I was doing the study, one of the funders informally told me, look, the reason we are red is that we don't have the funding to spend on monitoring research or improving our practices. And somebody on social media said, but what is more beneficial for the patient? We fund more research or we get our research practices right? Which I think is a fair question. And so the next thing I looked at was, do we involve patient and public in prioritizing research? We have 3 funders, again, the same 3 funders have extensive policies how to bring the patient as partners in the process. The other funding agencies who have patient reps on their funding committees, but the involvement is very limited, or the people have very little decision-making in the process, unfortunately. I would recommend you to look at the policies these funding agencies have. It's very impressive. The next question, the next policy that we suggested was, we need to have systematic reviews before funding new research. There are 2 funders who have that for all of their fundings, and I was surprised to find out that a number of funders recommend or require it for funding new clinical trials, which was quite good. And those are the ones that I marked yellow. But one thing you want to consider, sorry, I should check it goes out of forward. Yeah, this is the ones about systematic reviews for future research. And yeah, so the US funders, one of the things they have also highlighted is that in addition to systematic reviews, they talk about, do we need value information analysis along with it to see, is it new research, do we need it also, is it value for money to do it? So there's a question, what type of review of evidence you need? I do like to also talk about what's the definition of systematic review we need to inform future research. I don't expect you to read all the slide, but I would like you just to see the red part of it. Because one of the things is a question is why we do systematic reviews to inform future research is to avoid inappropriate funding decisions. So the methodology might be a bit different from the reviews we do for informing practice just to be able to meet that standard. Yeah. So the next few slides, I'm talking about how funders are dealing with reporting of research. So the first one is registration, which there are three funders who usually end up at the top, are more recommending not only clinical trials, but other type of research. Most funding agencies only require clinical trials to be registered. To give you an example, this is how most, like MRC requires clinical trials to be registered. The Australian funder even funds the clinical registry in their country. But PCORI, the US funder, would give you suggestion of different type of research they fund and where you can register it. If it's not a clinical trial, it's a bit more complicated sometimes because there are not so many options available, but they provide guidance what people can do. So as we come to the next two ones, is publishing protocol and publishing full data. It's become more challenging, I think, for some of the funding agencies, and maybe partially because some of the policies are not yet clear about it. I was struggling when I should give an HR yellow or green because I think they put a lot of work in to make all published protocols available, and the ones that are not yet available, the programs, they're in discussion how to make that happen. About completed research, the question is how much completed research is considered completed to be online. I think there's still a discussion how we can make raw data available. Matt highlighted that the NIHR even have their own journals, so they have control what gets published. But there is still, I think, there's still discussion in the community how we make all of the data available. One of the initiatives that you might heard of is this press release that the WHO came out, that some of the funders are now trying to have a discussion about how they can put policies in place to make that happen. So I gave you some of the examples of policy and practices that have evaluated based on reduced research framework, which is also in the Lancet paper. However, there's something that's a bit more complicated to evaluate, and I'm looking at it, but I didn't have it complete to present data. It's something that Ioannidis highlighted in his paper about how the push for innovation sometimes drives people to do research that shouldn't have done. And we have heard this theme in this Congress a few times. And I'm looking at the funding agency I looked up now. There is a lot of lack of clarity what they mean by innovation and creativity, a lot of misinterpretation between the researchers and the research funders, even in the research funding agency, what they want to achieve with that. They sometimes lead people to change research rather than replicate them in a way that's not needed. Finally, I do wanted to finish the presentation with a quote about Peter Drucker about culture eats strategy for breakfast. To remind, research funders are very influential, but they're just one player in the bigger system, and the interaction between the different partners is important. Like one of the funding agencies, like MRC, they don't require systematic reviews for all clinical trials, but a number of clinical trials I've seen funded by them in PubMed were funded by, had systematic reviews, not because the funder requested it, because the research unit they have funded had this culture there to do that. So sometimes it happens in other ways because other players are following it. And we have to also have a discussion not only to change policies, but how we change the culture. And finally, the work continues. I have still a lot of requests from people who want their funding agencies to be evaluated and to be added to the system and have the discussion how they can improve it. Thank you very much.